Now, this time I'm going to turn over the event to today's moderator, Tim Hudak, so he can open up the town hall and introduce the minister. Tim, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's call. As introduced, I'm Tim Hudak. I'm CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, proud to represent Ontario's almost 80,000 realtors. But I'm here with my hat on as somebody who had the honor of serving as a former minister of what was then called Tourism, Culture, and Recreation, and also having been at the cabinet table when we dealt previously with the post 9/11 and SARS crises. I remember how devastating that was to businesses like yours. And I can't even imagine today in a much worse scenario and with all the uncertainty what you're going through. We've had, I think, on these calls now the fourth, over 3,000 men and women involved in the various sectors under the Ministry of Heritage, Sports, Tourism, and Culture. And despite the difficult times, we're very fortunate to have a champion like Minister Lisa MacLeod there at the cabinet table fighting for you and your well-being and your interests during this difficult time. Ever since she was appointed to this ministry in June 2019, she's worked hard, spoke with many of you already, and many of you as well on these calls and regional meetings as COVID-19 has unfolded. So today we're here to talk about the challenges you face. There are some signs of light positive things or better news on the healthcare side, but still there's going to be an awful lot of questions of when things get moving and people come back to visit your businesses. And I know my daughters, Miller and Maitland, are really hoping to do so soon. On your phones, to ask a question, please press number 3. Mr. MacLeod's very good at getting through a whack of questions. We have some pre-submitted, and we'd like to take a lot of live phone calls. So please press number 3 on your phone to line up to ask the minister directly a question. All right, to kick things off, very pleased to introduce the very hardworking and somebody who's delivered hundreds of millions of dollars in additional funding for your businesses, the Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture, Minister Lisa MacLeod. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Tim. I appreciate you joining us once again during these surreal times. This is our, I think, fourth telephone town hall together. I really appreciate that stability and that consistency, and really grateful that after all these years you've left politics to come back to the ministry. I think that you probably enjoyed the most and have gone through significant challenges yourself through 9/11 and of course SARS, and then of course to see our stakeholders and the people that you've supported over all that time spring against very difficult. I also want to say thanks to James and to Eric who have been dealing with all the technical issues with respect to this particular format. I'm very grateful. Look, if I may off the top, I'd like to take a brief moment for all of us to reflect on the particular challenges that our fellow Canadians in Nova Scotia are facing this week. I know many on this call, like me, have family and friends in Canada's ocean playground. And even those of you who don't, I know you share in the grief of the tragedy that befell Nova Scotians over the past weekend. As a native Nova Scotian, my heart breaks for those whose lives were cut short and for those who lost loved ones. To be dealing with the worst mass shooting in Canadian history at a time we are living through the worst pandemic in our lifetimes is unimaginable. But growing up as a Blue Noser, I know the people of Nova Scotia are as resilient as they are kind and strong as they are welcoming. As an Ontario MPP, I am proud that our legislature is flying the beautiful Nova Scotia flag. As the minister responsible for the Niagara Parks Commission, I'm grateful for our board who made the decision to light the falls blue and white in solidarity with our grieving countrymen and women. In this moment, we're all together, and together we will get through this. As I turn my attention to all of you on this call, I know you are trying to make sense of the uncertainty. In less than 2 months, our sectors and industries in heritage, sport, tourism, and culture lost at least 300,000 jobs. Our $75 billion economic activity dropped by $17.5 billion almost overnight, according to reports that we're receiving from each of you. And those of you who have yet to shutter your doors or who are wondering if we will have a summer season to salvage are anxiously looking at your bank accounts and the calendar. I wish I had a crystal ball to say definitively when the province will open back up and that we could flick a switch and we would all be back to normal. I can't do that. No one can do that. What I can do is let you know that the most up-to-date information is available. As you know, Ontario extended our emergency orders until May 6th. The legislature will reconvene on May the 12th. As Premier Ford has said, we will only lift restrictions once it is safe to do so in a measured and methodical way. The Premier appointed me to the Economic Jobs and Recovery Committee, which will build out scenarios for reopening the economy. The 14 Ministerial Advisory Committees I have appointed in each of our sectors have begun work to provide me with the best advice on how we will do this. In sport, what will be the new protocols for play, facilities for fans in the stands? I've spoken with many of you, including Karen Stintz at Variety Village, who supports those with developmental disabilities. For our festivals, events, attractions, and community museum, galleries, and libraries, what does a safe return look like? And that's something I talk to Carolyn Pachinen from Ottawa about weekly. Our tourism communities, our hotels, our restaurants, and airlines play a vital role in exploring our own province and welcoming people from around the world. What does that look like post-COVID? Well, Leslie Harper of Niagara and Georgie Vincente and David McLaughlin, both from Windsor, and then, of course, the North, like to share their voices, as I know you do. These are all questions each of you can help us answer in the largest consultation the ministry has ever undertaken. It will form the basis of our 2020 to 2025 ministry strategy and will help create our requests for the fall budget. Together, you will all be part, and this is important, you will all be part of shaping our economy and our cultural identity as Canadians post-COVID-19. The full committee list of our advisory committees will be available on Monday, and we are welcoming others to participate with subcommittees. We're also undergoing a province-wide process with veteran MPP Norm Miller, who is working daily with MPPs from all political parties. This process, while understanding that money and stimulus will be required, is more about planning for a successful return for all of our sectors and industries when the time is right. This work will also be informed by work done by the Ministry of Labour and Skills Development that has released guidelines just yesterday, and in particular has guidelines for the following pertinent sectors within our ministry: cashiers, curbside delivery, hotel reception, room service, frontline workers, housekeeping and laundry, facilities maintenance, sales and customer service, TV hosts, technical crews, TV, film, and live performances, and tourism and hospitality. You can find these guidelines at www.wsps.ca/COVID-19 #downloads. Again, that is www.wsps.ca/COVID-19 #downloads. Many of you on this call have also asked me about commercial rents, including Andreas Antonio in Toronto. I've been advocating for you at the cabinet table and with my federal counterparts, and I'm pleased to say that advocacy has worked. Our finance minister is set to announce with the federal government details on the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. I know that this will help many of our tourism attractions, our associations, our restaurants, and pubs that are on this call. I want you to know that I've listened and I've acted. I've also spoken with our federal Minister of Heritage, Stéphane Guilbeault, to seek more details on the $500 million he announced for arts, culture, and sport. Without information on allocations and eligibility, it is difficult to say where and when the money will be spent. However, I can assure you that as Ontario's Minister, I have requested, as I promised to Margaret McGuffin of the Music Publishers of Canada and Slacko Clue of the Canadian Film Centre, that 40%, or the equivalent to our population of the country, of those funds be invested in our province, who by far has the most artists, athletes, and attractions in all of Canada. I'll continue to fight for our fair share so that we can continue to produce the best artists and athletes in Canada and the world. Within our government, we're continuing to flow programming dollars to our transfer payment partners, including Celebrate Ontario Festival funding, operating funding to provincial sport organizations, and youth cultural camps and industry associations as quickly as possible. As I've said on the previous calls, the allocation for my ministry remains whole at roughly $1.65 billion, which I'm committed to investing in our industries and local communities across the province. The beginning of a new fiscal year, however, is particularly challenging for our Treasury Board partners responsible for administratively flowing the fund, especially when all ministries are trying to expedite funding to support stakeholders' liquidity needs as a result of COVID-19. I'm grateful for all of you for your patience as your Ontario government continues to prioritize the public health and safety of all Ontarians, particularly those who have been infected by COVID-19 and those who are on the front lines of our public health, long-term care homes, and developmental services residences. You have my commitment that I will continue to advocate for your needs around the cabinet table to ensure our artists, our athletes, our visitors, and content creators are able to come back bigger and better than ever before when it's safe to do so. Tim, I'm happy to take any and all questions that we can get our time for.
You bet, Minister. Thank you very much for the opening comments, a description of the progress that you've made as our minister at the cabinet table since our last call. And I just want to say thanks. Your remarks about your home province of Nova Scotia, we're all saddened as Canadians know it's going to be particularly affecting to a proud Nova Scotian like yourself, that depth of tragedy. So our hearts go out to our friends in Nova Scotia. Folks, there are 1,200 people, Minister, on the line already for this call. So across the 4 calls, that puts us close to 4,500 in attendance. So to the 1,200 people listening today, if you've not been on this call before, the process is we do have the Minister until 3 p.m. today. Ask her whatever you like. She is open, transparent, takes all questions. Please hit number 3 on your phone, and we will queue you up to ask a question to the Minister directly and live. All right, we're going to start with some that were pre-submitted, Minister. You mentioned in your opening remarks that you have 14 advisory committees to help make the decisions on opening up the various sectors that you represent. So we have a question from Wayne Terryberry. He's with Outdoor Recreation at Master University in Hamilton. Terry wants to ask you, would we be able to create an advisory committee for outdoor recreation parks and trails to coordinate the opening of parks and trails and to discuss trail tourism?
Thanks very much, Wayne, for that question. I appreciate it. I think that we'll cap our advisory teams at the ones that we have created already. The ministry is quite broad. Having said that, I think there is merit to ensuring that we do have a subcommittee of our attractions and festivals and events committee, and I'll be making sure to relay that along to them. I believe they either meet later this afternoon or early tomorrow. I think that it's important that we talk about the coordination of that and that we all have the best information as available to us as possible. I think that the one thing I'm very proud of in the ministry is that we reached out early after COVID-19 hit to put the best and brightest people around the table so that we could be informed on the needs and what the requirements would be. And I must say how impressed I have been with the ingenuity and the creativity of the people within this ministry and the sectors and industries in looking at post-COVID. You know, Wayne Gretzky has always said that don't go to where the puck is, go to where the puck is going to go. And I think that we're trying to do that within this ministry to look at, you know, what does it look like 3 months, a year down the road. And while I don't, as I said, have that crystal ball for us to say when things will be safe enough to open, I do think that we can create these templates for each of the sectors individually that allow us to move forward. I also just want you to know that I speak frequently with Minister Urick, the Minister of Environment and Parks, and we have had that discussion that we would really much appreciate the opportunity to have to have a joint dialogue on how my parks commissions and his parks and campgrounds would work together, as well as the trails throughout the province. So we'll make sure, Wayne, that we have that conversation with our 2 co-chairs, and that we enact on that plan that you've put in place. So I appreciate that. Great question.
All right. Again, folks, you can press number 3 on your phone to line up to ask Minister a question live on this telephone town hall. And before I get to the first one lined up, there's another one that was pre-submitted. I'm sure, Minister, is on everybody's mind. It comes from Lori Siblock. Lori is the manager of the Lang Pioneer Village Museum in Peterborough. And Lori asks you, what do you see as the most important thing that organizations and businesses can be doing at this time to prepare ourselves for the eventual day when we may reopen our doors again?
Well, look, thanks, Lori. I'm really excited to be working with many of our museums network, and of course, Marie Lalonde is one of my co-chairs on that attractions panel and festivals and events, and so certainly our community museums across Ontario will have a major role in how we move forward and reopen. I'm excited that that many of the museums are starting to talk about best practices that they've seen from around the world who are getting out of this situation, this COVID-19 situation, before us because they were hit quickly. And we want to leverage those ideas from other jurisdictions. And I'm particularly proud, for example, that the Royal Ontario Museum is one of the assets within this ministry. And we work closely with Josh, the president and CEO, who has been on calls with us before. And Josh has been, telling us, from the networks that he's got worldwide, some of the things that are going on. So we're going to continue to monitor that. And of course, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have a plan for museums based on the best practices that our museums are telling us that they have had. In the meantime, I would just point to the downloads that I talked about a little bit earlier about the health and safety and well-being, and you can get that at WSPS.ca. But I'm looking forward to the day that our museums can open again. And as I said, we'll continue to flow our museum funding because we want to make sure that when you're safe to do so, you can open your doors again. And again, the protocols may change as we talk to the ROM and others. What does a digital and touch experience look like post COVID-19? And I think your feedback will be critical in that. And of course, your industry association or your sector association will be very much a part of that conversation.
Folks, you are one of 1,200 people on the line right now for a live telephone town hall with the Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries, the Honourable Lisa MacLeod. Please press 3 on your phone to ask the Minister a live question. And Derek, let's go now to the first caller. Callers, I'd please ask you to tell us your name and what business you're with. So, Jack, go ahead.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, we got you.
Jack.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with the Kinsman Club of Sarnia in the brighter part of Ontario, and I'm just one of many organizations that have outside fundraisers throughout the summer. We've moved from June to August, and the monies we raise are stayed locally. And we're a nonprofit, of course, being the Kinsman Club. And we just wondered, does it look like we may have a chance this year? The money we raise is money we'll go back and our cystic fibrosis and local organizations, food banks, and things like that are what we raise. And usually a year funds with around $30,000 a year goes back in the community. And we just wondered, are we going to have to come up with some other idea to raise that money, because we don't want the community to go behind?
Oh, Jack, what a great question. And look, it's National Volunteer Week, so let me start by saying thank you, the Kinsman Club of Canada, and of course in Sarnia, does their level best to make sure that that the community does get ahead. So, on behalf of me and the team, I want to say thank you. And I know Sarnia got a heck of a strong MPP, and Bob Bailey, who's been very active within our ministry to make sure that the local interests in his community are supported. And just before COVID-19, Bob was in the office meeting with the team, talking about some of the tourism and museum attractions. I wish I could tell you, Jack, but I can't. The decisions that we're making are really based on public health and containing the spread of COVID-19 and making sure every available resource we have is supporting our frontline healthcare workers. And, as I've been saying since day one, these are moments literally that change by the moment and by the second. Forget day by day, week by week. This is we're living this in real time, and there really is no playbook. And so I ask you for your patience, and I understand the great contribution that the Kinsman Club and all of our philanthropic groups across the province make. But I think that it's too early to say. And I'll tell you what, if we're in a safe environment for you to do so at the end of August, I'll try to get up there for that Rib Fest. But I'll tell you, I think it's way too early for us to know, and that's why I'm relying on those on the ground with public health officials to figure out when we might be able to start reopening up. But as our Premier said just as early as an hour ago, we're extending our emergency orders till the 6th of May. The legislature will not return until the 12th of May. And we're doing so because we really need to contain the spread of this virus. We need to not only peak this plateau, but we need to decrease the spread of COVID-19, particularly in our long-term care homes. So I understand where your heart is, and that's probably why you're a volunteer and why you love your community so much. But I think the best thing for all of us right now is to follow the guidance of Dr. Williams, who is our Chief Medical Officer of Health, until we get past this.
Man, I'm craving ribs now, though, aren't you?
Well, that's the one thing about you, Tim Hudak, that maybe others that don't know you as well as I know you. Tim Hudak is a world-class rib smoker, I guess. Is that what it's called?
Sure, I like smoked ribs. I know I'm totally hungry now after Jack's question. Well, thanks for answering that. I know that people are, I'm anxious as a fan to be able to go back to Rib Fest, but we got to make sure it's done the right way to control the spread. And that sort of gets to my next question, Minister. This one is one that was pre-submitted as well. And again, a reminder to those listening, you want to ask Minister a question, please press 3 on your phone. We'll put you on live, just like Jack. So I know that Premier Ford chose to put you on the important Economic and Jobs Recovery Committee to start laying out the rules. So that's great to have the Minister for these sectors right there at the main table. So Jocelyn Johnston from the city of Brampton asked a question. Again, this one's on everybody's mind, Minister. She's asking, have there been considerations for physical distancing protocols for live event venues in the time ahead?
Yeah, look, Jocelyn, great question, because I think we're now turning our attention to what does recovery look like. We have been in this ministry for a while, and that's why the Economic and Jobs Recovery Committee was started by Premier Ford, and it's chaired by my colleague, the Minister of Finance, Rod Phillips. What we're doing is, with respect to internally with our own ministry, those are some of the questions that two advisory committees will start to look at. One is the music industry, because we understand that live music was hit very quickly and hard because of live music venues. So Aaron Benjamin is one of our co-chairs, along with Alan Reid, and Aaron Benjamin is with Canadian Live Music, and Alan Reid is with the Junos and Caris, and they'll be working on a music strategy for us. But that will also include how do we safely return to live events. In addition, then we do have a festival and events and attractions Ministerial Advisory Committee, which will also be looking at the same. And so we'll make sure that the two groups get together when that happens, and we'll be making recommendations at the table that is required within the cabinet with the best available public health. But I can assure you that this work has been started, and we are following the advice of the Public Medical Officer of Health, but at the same time we're looking at workplace safety standards, and we're looking at what is required for all of those in what I would call the ecosystem of a live event. And so we have many different workers that come in. If you think about, let me talk about Blues Fest in my own city of Ottawa, we know that there are many technicians behind the scenes. There are people that are delivering porta potties and other equipment. We do have then the artists or those performers, and then we have people that take the tickets. And we just need to make sure that that we're prepared for that. But that work is being done. And again, I just refer you at the meantime, when you're looking at any of this workplace safety, is to go to wspc.ca just to find out what the latest will be. But we'll continue to update that, and we'll continue to have those conversations internally so that we have the best practices to keep people the safest, and at the same time, when it's safe to do so, to assemble.
Minister, we're now over 1,300 callers on the line, and the next one with a question is Jim. So, Eric, let's queue up Jim. Jim, where are you from, and what question do you have to ask the Minister?
I'm from St. Anne's Spa in Grafton, Ontario. We're a destination spa. We decided to close on March 18th when the restaurant closing order was issued, only because the sense was that our customers really wouldn't go for takeout in a destination spa environment. As I understand the legislation, we're technically still allowed to be opened as an accommodation provider. But as I said, we're closed because of the takeout issue. We thought the closure would be maybe 2 weeks, and then it was extended by another 2 weeks to accommodate all the folks returning from Florida and March break. I'm now thinking maybe we could open or welcome the public back on the first weekend in June, again, considering that we're a hotel and offer accommodation. But I'm concerned because if the public messaging is still don't leave your home, we're not going to be able to attract people successfully. I think people want to come here. The customers we're talking to want to come here and need to come to a place like St. Anne's after what will have then been 80 days of isolation. I'm just wondering if I'm safe to start planning towards taking reservations in the first week of June for a destination spa, even if we are offering room service and social distancing and all that kind of stuff on the property.
Yeah, so you're looking at a gradual opening, I guess. I really can't answer that for you. I have no idea when it is going to be safe for people to travel, and my advice will always be to stay home. The public medical officer of health will continually support the government in gradually reopening, but you're already on the essential services list. That's a game time call for you. I would always recommend people to plan, but at this particular time, unless it's essential services in terms of providing accommodation for people, I'm not going to recommend that they go to a spa. So I do apologize for that. Because you're considered recreational, that would be end up being opened up to the province gradually. But in terms of in terms of your accommodation and as well as your room service, the province of Ontario through workplace safety guidelines has provided some information on that at the WS. I lost my sheet here. Let me find it. At wsps.ca, and I would encourage you to do that. But I think in terms of the spa, that is recreational, and you could always call the hotline. But again, that is something that you'll have to continue to monitor.
All right, Minister, we've had a number of questions there in the tourism and hospitality sectors. Let's now move to the world of sport. Sarah Rastani, she's a program manager with Kids Sport Ontario, has pre-submitted a question about recreation. And Sarah asks you, how will the government support sports organizations phase sport back into normalcy of everyday life for those who might be struggling now?
Well, thanks very much. I know that that's a significant issue for many people. We had that conversation, of course, yesterday at our amateur sport roundtable, and that is co-chaired by Karen Stintz, who is at Variety Village in Toronto that works with developmental disability children and those with other special needs, as well as with Cyril Leader, who is the former president and CEO of the Ottawa Senators, our two co-chairs, and our panel. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that we continue to flow funding for provincial sport organizations, while at the same time looking at where, as I said before, where the puck's going to be. How do we do this safely? How do we ensure that if that in locker rooms, for example, and in our facilities, that they're clean? How do we support the Zamboni driver, while at the same time understanding that we might be limited with fans and stands on these early days. So those are some of the things that our advisory panel on amateur sport will be looking into. And certainly we would be interested in hearing what Kids Sport Ontario has to say about this, and perhaps even joining one of our subcommittees so that we can make sure that sport's there. One of the other things, and you know, when you're talking about everyday life for those who might be struggling, and I'm not going to answer that in terms of sport. I'm going to answer it in every single aspect of this ministry. Since day one, and I'm going to go back to my roots. I come from a coal mining town called New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. The town population, I don't think ever made it over 10,000. My dad himself ended up starting the ringette and the soccer leagues for me and my sister so that girls could play sports. My mom and dad never made more than $40,000 a year, but managed to make sure my sister and I felt that we were wealthy because we were able to play sport. We were able to take art in the park and take advantage of all of those things that are necessary for a good, vibrant community. And so one of the things I said, and my deputy, Nancy, is on the line right now, I've always said that we need to make all of the programs within our ministry accessible, which means no matter, you know, what your ability is, you should be able to play at some level or create at some level. The second thing I said is it needs to be attainable, meaning any person in the province of Ontario who wants to contribute on the ice, in the park, on the canvas, in front of a screen, should find some level of attainability. That's why I'm proud of the AGO and the ROM and so many others that are affiliated with this ministry, because they all have that philanthropic bent so that art and culture can be attainable. And that's why, you know, I ask, even with and that's just in Toronto, my own city of Ottawa, we have the Shaw Centre. I'm very proud of the Shaw Centre as an agency of our government. And we were able to save Christmas cheer. One of the things that's going to have to come out of this crisis, this public health crisis, this economic crisis, this social crisis, is we're going to have to make sure that the strongest among us help those who are struggling the most up. And, you know, we've often been said we are only as strong as our weakest link. When we look 3 months, 18 months, 5 years down the road, this province will only be as strong as those who have fallen behind during this process. And so on a go-forward basis, our planning will always ensure that there will be attainability, whether that's in sport, culture, arts. And, you know, I think that's got to be the number one priority for all of us.
Folks, you have joined the telephone town hall live with the Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries, Minister Lisa MacLeod. My name's Tim Hudak, CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association and recovering politician myself. Okay, Minister, now to the arts organizations. We have a question coming in from Jason. So, Jason, you're on next. Tell us what part of the province you're from and who you're with.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time today, Minister. My name is Jason Milski. I'm the Managing Director of Counterparts, Ontario, and we are the Association of Professional Visual and Media Artists here in Ontario. We have approximately 1,000 members who are all practicing artists. And I'm hearing from our members that folks are fairly happy with what's happening in terms of funding and support coming down from the federal level right now. And certainly folks are encouraged by the 10-point plan that you released toward the end of March. However, other than continuing to fund the Ontario Arts Council, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, both of which, you know, received significant cuts, I suppose my members want to know what is happening and what kind of supports are coming directly from the province to make sure that the lives and practices of Ontario artists and artist-led organizations are going to be able to weather this storm.
Well, thanks for the question. The funding actually hasn't been cut this year. It remains stable. I think you'd probably want to clarify that with your members, first and foremost. Second, I think if you're encouraged by the 10-point plan, you would have been encouraged 2 weeks ago when we flowed $67 million through the Ontario Trillium Fund. And I understand you're probably very excited about the $500 million coming from the federal government. I would be too if I had details on what the allocation and the eligibility requirements are. So that's why I spoke with Stephane Guibault ago on Monday and suggested that we need to make sure that Ontario gets its fair share, at least 40% of that budget, given that we have the most creators and athletes in the country, and we are 40% of the population. So any support that you could provide, your Ontario government in getting that fair share is something that I would certainly be excited about, because we've been working very hard and obviously looking forward to collaborating with our federal counterparts. And I'm sure you could also appreciate that any response from the provincial government must come after the federal government, just to assess what the gaps would be and how we will best complement their investments. And so, I think that we'll wait and see what those eligibility requirements are and what the allocations were. But let me tell you, I'm going to make sure that Ontario gets its fair share based on our population, and as well as based on the fact that we are, I would say, home to more artists and more athletes than anyone else in the province. So thanks very much, Jason. And again, just to reiterate, the budget in this ministry actually went up over this past year, and the Ontario Arts Council allocation has stabilized, and the Trillium Foundation actually flowed $67 million through community program recently, and we continue to support, obviously, Ontario Creates, and that's why we modernized the Ontario Music Fund, and that funding will be allocated through Ontario Creates in the month of May.
We have over 1,300 talented leaders and entrepreneurs from the heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries online. If you want to ask a question, as Jason just did, directly to the very open, transparent, and hardworking minister, please do so by hitting number 3 on your phone. Again, hit number 3 on your phone, and we'll put you through to ask the minister. We have her until 3 p.m. today. Minister, I'm going to do the host's privilege here. One thing that I think a lot of people are curious about is we've got a federal government and a provincial government. We're all working on the crisis. One's liberal, one's conservative, and there's a guy named John Wilkinson from Toronto who submitted a question ahead of time that's in this ballpark. People want to know, how do you work across governments? Do you consult regularly with your federal and provincial counterparts, and how do you share and learn from other jurisdictions?
Sure. Well, great question. And just, I guess, to piggyback off of the last question on the culture side, obviously, I speak weekly with my ministry counterpart in tourism, the Honourable Melanie Jolie. In fact, I'd hope to have her on one of these calls. And so if scheduling permits, we're going to do that to talk about tourism. Tourism is about a $35, $36 billion industry in the province of Ontario. And we want to make sure that the recovery includes all of this because it's absolutely critical. I think, and by the way, tonight at 5:30 every Thursday night, we do meet as a federal, provincial, and territorial group on tourism. We have had less frequent calls with Heritage, but I did speak this week with the Honourable Stéphane Guilbeault and looking at what the $500 million would entail and how that would be allocated and who would be eligible in the province. And certainly I'm enjoying working with both of them. The commercial rent, obviously, issue is one that we had advocated for, and we're pleased to see agreement between our government and the federal government, and so details will be coming forward there. And I know that was something we pushed for, particularly with for our restaurateurs as well as our tourism attractions. So we speak regularly, and if it's the same John Wilkinson that we serve with in the legislature, I'll just have to say you'll get it. Both of you will get a kick out of this. I probably speak to Dalton McGuinty once a week throughout this crisis. As you know, we're both Ottawa area residents, and our ridings used to abut back in the day, and so I've been fortunate to have advice from and people from across party lines and from various levels of government. You know, I spoke with Gilles Bisson last week and had a great conversation. He's the NDP House Leader, and I know, like, I speak with Wayne Gates. I don't know if Wayne's on the phone, but he's been fighting for Niagara Falls, and he's been making sure to keep me up to date on what's going on there. And so I think at this point in time, there are no team colors, there are no real levels of government. It's just a real get her done mentality on behalf of the province and the country.
Yeah, I think that's great, Minister. Thanks for saying that, how you're reaching across the floor and to different levels of government to get things done for the folks here on the call. Okay, here's an interesting question from Jean Cutliff. Jean is the manager, owner of 1,000 Islands Tours. Jean says, we host many European group tours as well as individuals at our resort. What extra marketing, if any, does Ontario have planned to bring those markets back to our region?
Well, listen, first of all, Jean, if you're on the line right now, I have to tell you, I love the Thousand Islands. I had, Steve Clark, it happens to be one of my best friends, your MPP and our Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister. And so spent a lot of time down there with my family and his. And I had a great weekend there, going to some of your festivals and checking out aerial tour of the Thousand Islands, probably one of the most magnificent places planet Earth. I love it so much. When I first moved to Ontario 20 years ago, I always found going to Brockville very similar to going to the little town I grew up in. So, Jean, I think what a great place in the world you live in. Obviously there are certain areas in the province that are tourism hotspots that bring people from around the world to marvel at the Thousand Islands. Niagara Falls, Muskoka, and of course the Great White North. And I'll have to tell you that we have been working hard since day one with Destination Ontario to assess what's going on the ground in some of our key markets. So here's what we've done. We maintained our business-to-business relationships on the ground in those key markets. We didn't haul back on them, but what we have done is we redirected our marketing dollars. And at the same time, Destination Ontario is working on an ad campaign that will let people know that when it is safe to do so, we will be safe to welcome them back. In addition to all of the work we're doing with Destination Ontario, I set up a Ministerial Advisory Committee on tourism. And so RTO 9 is represented. Bonnie's on the call. And they will have a number of subcommittees in terms of, what do you do with the domestic market? What do you do with the international market? That sort of thing. At the same time, we have got another advisory panel with all of our major airlines and all of our major airports. They met this morning. That's being chaired by Jeffrey Brown of Porter Airlines, but we do have representation from Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transat, Sunwing, and they're all there to help us understand what safety looks like on our airlines and in our airports, but at the same time, how do we sort of bring back those key markets when it's safe to do so? So we're actively working on that right now, Jean, and I got to tell you, I'm so excited to go back to the Thousand Islands this summer. I love the place. It's only an hour drive from me, and we want to make sure that people get to see some of the beautiful landscapes that we have and meet some of the wonderful people that live there.
All right, Minister MacLeod, we will move now to the world of film. I know a sector you're very excited to see promoted in our province and all the spin-off jobs. So Nellie Linder, who is the Vice President of BFL Canada, asks, how does Minister MacLeod see the opening up to the film industry looking like?
Thanks. So I met with the Canadian Film Centre earlier this morning and their board, and I have been meeting regularly with a number of our production companies. And of course, our Film and Television Advisory Committee has been looking at ways to, streamline our tax credits, make sure we have more film-friendly locations. How do we enhance training, and how do we ensure that there's greater Canadian content coming out of this? Because I think content will be king later on. So some of the areas that we're looking at is streamlining and our tax credits, making sure that they remain stable so that we're competitive when it's safe to do so, that we can open up film-friendly locations. I met with Triborough last night and Stratagem, and we're just making sure that in both cases that they continue to expand and we're able to support their efforts where it's needed when it's safe to do so. In terms of training, we've been fortunate to have, I think, some really great union leadership within the province, at NABET and others, and I'm excited that they're looking at online training if they haven't already done so. They've contributed to the workplace safety sheets that I've been referring to today. So I'm very proud of those efforts. So I think that in terms of training, we're not stopping. We're going to continue to do that. And on Canadian content, I made an investment of $1 million to the Canadian Film Centre in March. And with the mandate that they expand our Canadian content, I don't think we want to be in a position in the province of Ontario or in Canada telling people what to put on their screens. I want the rest of the world to compete for our content and our content. Yesterday was Canadian Film Day. And we talked a little bit about some of the great Canadian films that were coming out of Ontario, supported by Ontario Creates and your Ontario government. And one of them is premiering, was supposed to premiere tonight actually in Toronto, was The Cuban by Sergio Navrata, a filmmaker based out of Toronto. And Sergio's going online in the Super Channel in May to premiere his movie The Cuban. And I think that we have to look at creative ways, but at the same time, I think we actually have to be planning for the opening of our doors, and what does that look like? And I know those discussions are happening, but I think that we're going to be extremely competitive. And just before I go on this point, Tim, right before COVID-19 hit, we had announced that the film industry in Ontario was $2.16 billion worth of economic activity. It was up from $1.9 billion, and if you can believe it, the growth, that extra $200 million, was from Canadian content because people want it.
You're on a live telephone town hall with Minister Lisa MacLeod. We're finally seeing a bit of bright light among all the negative news. What does that mean to you? Well, your chance to ask Minister MacLeod directly. Hit 3 on your phone and we will queue you up. The next question, Minister, is a question about grants coming through the ministry. So Barbara, we'll put you on the line now. Barbara, tell us where you're from in the province and who you work for.
I'm from Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I work with the Niagara Jazz Festival, the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum, and Music Niagara, and various other arts organizations around the region. Thank you, Minister. My question is, what are your guidelines going to be to the various granting authorities regarding extensions and flexibility of the various grants that are in the works for this summer?
Thanks, Barbara. I can't wait to go back to Niagara-on-the-Lake again. I was just there. Well, not just. It was on New Year's Eve. I was down as the minister responsible for the Niagara Parks Commission, and I had a lovely afternoon in Niagara-on-the-Lake. So I can't wait to get back there. Beautiful area of the province. We're not looking to penalize anyone, so we will be honoring all grant contracts. Our grant organizations, which are Ontario Creates, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the OAC, are just now working liquidity out. And of course, we work with our Treasury Board partners just so that we make sure that all of the auditing is correct, and that transparency and public accountability will remain. But we're going to continue to honor all grant contracts. So that's the right thing to do. And as I've said since the beginning of this crisis, I don't know how long it will last. I hope it's over, soon. But by the time 2021 rolls around, I want to make sure that all those public events and festivals that remind us of why we love to live in our communities and why we love to visit other communities are there. And so, thank you very much for the work that you're doing and for making Niagara-on-the-Lake a great place to live and to visit.
All right. Thanks, Barbara, for that question. Okay, Minister, now a very practical question from the world of sport. Tesfaye Mengesha, the Executive Director of Success Beyond Limits, asks you, will organizations that receive after-school program grants receive their final 2 payments this year? And will that grant be available in September?
Well, look, we recognize these organizations have already invested these funds to operate the program, so I'm not going to add to their burden. I think the after-school programs are some of the greatest things that we deliver as a government. I was particularly proud. I wrote a book, I'd Rather Be Baking Cookies, Tim, and you actually have a couple of recipes in there.
That was a good book.
Yeah, thank you. One of the great events that I actually did was the after-school program in my own city of Ottawa with the Boys and Girls Club. And though I don't have a Boys and Girls Club in the riding in Nepean, I've become, over the years, very close with the organization, just seeing what the great work that they do, the meaningful impact that they have on children's lives. And so we made a nice little announcement there to support after-school programming, and it would break my heart if I had to ask them to return their funds, because at the end of the day, they're finding creative ways to support those children, and those children are among Ontario's most vulnerable. And so I think that would be unfair, and I would not place that burden, not in my shoes, not when I'm the minister, not while I'm in government.
Next question is about large-scale events. It comes from Elizabeth Bender, who is the event coordinator of the Fergus Scottish Festival. I remember going there, Minister, when I was tourism minister. I even had a kilt made up for me, though it was Clan Mackay, not Clan MacLeod. But hopefully that's not part of an old war back in the old country. Anyway, Elizabeth asks you, What support are available to organizations that put on large-scale events with attendance in tens of thousands so we can continue to do what we do best, but also keep our guests, volunteers, and others safe?
Well, it's great. I've never been to the Fergus Scottish Festival, if you can believe it. I have been to the Glengarry Games, which sadly has decided this year they will cancel their games. And as a kid who grew up in a place called New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, obviously I wear my tartan proudly on my sleeve. So, I think these cultural events, regardless if you're Scottish or if it's Carabana or the Greek Fest or the Lebanese Festival, Ukrainian Festival we have, I've always said that we're the world in one province. And I think when you look at Ontario, you can see people from every walk of life, from every ethnic background who speak multiple different languages. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that we have to offer, and we'll always continue to support that. So if you're eligible for a Celebrate grant, we're just working through that right now. And if not, there's a number of different opportunities. I didn't really get to talk about today the project that we're working on, Ontario Live, and we right now have, I think, over 200 pieces of digital content ready to go. And actually the website, let me give a sneak peek because we haven't announced it yet, but Elizabeth, check out ontario.live. And so everybody, actually, there's 1,200 of you on the call, ontario.live. We're right now accepting digital content. We want to make sure that if you have archives in the past of the Fergus Festival, Fergus Scottish Festival, we can put that up. I mean, I really could use the bagpipes right now. After the week, some of my family members have had, and watching from afar what's happened, and obviously dealing with COVID-19 and seeing what's happening in our province, and seeing what it's doing to our healthcare system and to the people that I, my job is to protect and support. I could listen to your bagpipes right now. So that's what we're at. We'll continue to work with our federal counterparts to see what level of funding that they're going to have for the culture and the arts, as well as what they're going to come out with in terms of a tourism package for festivals and events. And then we'll be in a position. And when the legislature resumes, hopefully we'll have an opportunity as well to engage more members of provincial parliament so that we can talk about what the needs are in their communities. And I know, in Fergus, you have a strong MPP in our speaker, Ted Arnott, and just a terrific gentleman who has been in close contact with all of government throughout this to make sure that the needs of his constituents are being shared with each of us.
All right, Minister, I've got one last pre-submitted question, and then I'll ask you to give some closing remarks after that, given the time. But this is one I think will help end on a very optimistic note, knowing you, is from Denise Herrera Jackson. Denise is the director of Toronto Carnival. And Denise asks you, how can festivals contribute to the economy of the province of Ontario post-COVID-19?
Well, let me say, and I'll take a question from the phone too after this, Tim, because I don't think anyone needs my closing remarks as much as maybe they want some answers to their questions. But Denise, I was fortunate last summer after I got appointed to this position to visit Carnival. I have a great dance with your deputy mayor, and had a lot of fun getting to see a lot of old friends there, including my friend Farley Flex. The reason I love Celebrate, and the reason I love investing in festivals, is because every single dollar we put in, the province of Ontario gets $21 back. And so I think that as long as we can continue to support, it's a targeted strategic investment into communities. And when I look at Carnival and what it brings, we met people from all over the world when we were there, and it speaks to that world in one province and how we want to make sure when it's safe to do so to bring the world back to our province. It's events like this, and I often say I can travel the world in Ottawa and Toronto and many of our urban cities without leaving the city limits. And that's really an exciting thing for me. So I think that when you look at what you're contributing to the economy, I think you continue to do that. And I think you need to make sure that your content is digital. So just like the Fergus Festival, if you can make sure that we've got that content at ontario.live, that would be fantastic. And then the other thing, and this is my message, I think, to everybody, I know that 2020 has not turned out the way we all wanted, and that we have a lot of uncertainty whether we're going to be able to open our trails, hold our festival, and go for and go to a concert in this summer, and are we able to salvage it? And we don't know, and it's not looking the greatest. However, if we're looking forward, let's look forward to 2021. Let's make 2021 our marquee year. All of our festivals have an opportunity in 2021 because, look, we're hosting the Grey Cup. The Junos are coming home. We've got the OHL's Cup is coming, the Memorial Cup. We've got the Canada 2021 Games. This should be a year in 2021 of celebration, and hopefully by then we'll have COVID-19 behind us. We will have the best protocols for safety and health in place, and potentially there will be a vaccine. And so I think, like, let's plan, let's not panic, and let's get out of this together at the right time when it's safe to do so.
See, I've known you well over these 15 years. I knew you'd say a very inspiring words and put a smile on our faces, Minister, with that question. We do have time, if you're foregoing your final remarks. We do have a question from Ben about commercial rent.
If it's tough, I'm giving it to you, though.
Sure, that question period. Eh? No, this is one I know you've been scrapping on this, really pushing for some help for commercial rent. So I think it's a really good question. So Ben, why don't you come on the line here? Tell us where you're from and what you do.
Hi, thank you. I'm Ben Donoghue. I'm the Executive Director of the Media Arts Network of Ontario. And for our members in commercial leases, support for rent and also potentially reform of lease conditions, property tax, prevention of eviction in commercial tenancies is really important as we wait for potential rent support from the federal government. And I'd like to know what the province is planning on doing.
I appreciate that, Ben. Really great question. This is something that I believe passionately about for the last little while, because for many of our organizations, giving them a wage subsidy really was irrelevant if they couldn't actually continue to operate within their facilities. And so I think that this is really great news coming out of the federal government. We have been lobbying for them. And so, according to the federal government, they're going to need the province to sign on. And so our finance minister will have more to say on that. I'll let him share the details on where he's landed on this. But I think that there will be good news for those needing commercial leases, so that will help them with the wage subsidy. I've always said, we need you to be there when this is over. First of all, you create jobs. Second of all, many of you on this line are part of our culture and our identity and who we expect our community to be. Now, we may have to change how that is in terms of our experiences, in terms of how we conduct ourselves after this as a result of the public health crisis. But that said, we want to give you that opportunity to adapt. So I'll let Minister Phillips speak more to that. That's his announcement to make. I'm just certainly excited that the federal government yesterday announced that they would be working with the provinces, and that will be something that we will endeavor to do.
Well, Minister, the clock on the wall says 3 p.m., so it's a great way to wrap up with Ben's question. So I want to say thank you very much to you, Minister MacLeod. You're a great voice for this sector, reflecting the quality of people, determined, creative, and optimistic for better days ahead. So, folks, thank you very much for joining today's call. The Minister's team will receive any questions we did not get to help inform their communications going forward. And I want to remind you that your representatives at the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries are available to support you, to answer your questions as this pandemic and recovery continue to unfold. Thank you so much for joining our call.